Hey you, thanks for stopping by. The day's done, so let's settle in and make ourselves comfortable. I brought a few stories to share. The bucket with nothing to catch. There was a metal bucket that sat under the edge of a roof, waiting for a leak that never came. It hadn't moved in years. Its handle was rusted at the hinge, and its rim had turned a soft green-gray where the rain had kissed it once and then stopped. It didn't clang, it didn't collect, it just simply rested there, slightly off-center, on a square of stone. At night, condensation formed along its edge, but never enough to gather, just enough to feel like maybe something had happened. And in the morning, it always looked exactly the same. The towel that had dried everything once. Folded neatly on the third shelf of a linen closet, there was a towel that had dried almost everything in the house. A cat, a plate, a window pane, a pair of wet shoes. Now it sat in the middle of the stack, still holding the shape of a good fold. The corners were soft. One edge curled just slightly, like it remembered being tugged but couldn't remember when. No one reached for it anymore, but the scent of clean cotton still lingered when the door opened. It wasn't clean or dirty, it was just done. The wind that got lost in a stairwell. There was a moment just after dusk when the wind entered a stairwell and didn't know how to leave. It spun once, quietly, and then settled into the corners like it had meant to do all along. The building around it stayed still. No footsteps, no voices, only the creak of the railings remembering movement. The wind didn't move again. It just became part of the air, no longer moving, but still unfamiliar. By morning, it had faded, but the air still felt like it had once held something restless. And then even that feeling was gone. The bag that wasn't packed. A small backpack sat near the edge of a couch, zipper half open, but with nothing inside. It wasn't forgotten, just never started. One strap hung slightly lower than the other, as if waiting for a shoulder that didn't arrive. The fabric still held its color, and the pocket seams were intact. It looked prepared even with nothing in it. Someone had once put a hand on it maybe, or thought about it, but the bag never moved. It wasn't empty because it had been emptied. It was empty because it had never been filled. The paperclip in the windowsill. There was a single paperclip left on a wooden windowsill just far enough from the edge to stay safe. It had been bent once and then returned to shape. Not perfectly, but close enough that only someone really looking would notice. The sun touched it for about 4 minutes every morning, not long enough to warm it, just enough to remind it that outside existed. It didn't hold anything together. It wasn't in the way. It didn't move. It stayed where it was, a small piece of metal that didn't ask to mean anything. The traffic light in the field. Out past the edge of a back road, a traffic light stood alone in a field. It wasn't connected to anything. No wires, no base, just there, upright, whole. It never changed color. The green stayed lit, flickering just slightly in the wind. No road led to it, no car ever passed. The grass had grown around it in a soft spiral, like the world had made space but no purpose. At night, the green light stayed on, not bright enough to guide, just bright enough to be noticed. The gap between things. There was a space, barely a fingertip wide, between the bookshelf and the wall. Too narrow to store anything, too shallow to peer into. Dust gathered along the edge but didn't fall in. Light never seemed to reach the bottom. If anything had slipped into the gap, it didn't make a sound. There was no draft, no echo, just the quiet certainty that something could fit there, even if it never did. The leaf that landed too gently. A single leaf fell from a tree but landed so softly it didn't make a sound, not even a whisper. It came to rest on a patch of grass already the same color as if it had been there the whole time. The wind passed through once more but didn't pick it back up. The other leaves didn't seem to notice. By evening, dew gathered on the curve of its spine, not enough to soak, just enough to reflect a little gray sky. It stayed in place, not held, not stuck, just there. The chair that faced the wrong direction. There was a chair in a sunroom that didn't face the window. It sat turned just slightly, as if someone had once meant to rearrange it, but stopped halfway and forgot. The legs left faint marks on the rug that never fully faded. The cushion hadn't been sat on in years, but it didn't seem unused. It just existed at an angle, not facing anything, not avoiding anything either. Sometimes light pooled across the back of it, sometimes it didn't. It was a chair, facing no one. The mist that didn't notice you were there. In a field just after dawn, a low mist settled at ankle height. It didn't rise, it didn't drift, it just lingered, uninterested in where it came from or where it would go. You could walk through it without changing it. It held no shape, no path, no scent. The grass underneath was dry. The sky above had already moved on, but the mist stayed, as if it had nothing else to do. The ice cube tray with no freezer. There was an ice cube tray tucked into the back of a cabinet, far from anything cold. It had once been filled, frozen, emptied, and returned, but never to the same place. Now it rested quietly on its side, one corner slightly warped from heat. A bit of dust had settled inside the empty molds, but only lightly, like it hadn't quite earned it. It didn't seem to mind. It wasn't waiting for water. It wasn't trying to chill. It had simply outlived the freezer. The binder with just one page. A thick plastic binder sat upright on a shelf, its spine cracked from years of being opened too wide. Inside was only one page, hole punched perfectly, no writing, no marks. The rings were slightly off, so the page never sat quite centered. Sometimes if the window was open just right, the page would flutter a little, but not enough to lift. The binder didn't look incomplete. It just looked like it had done what it had came to do, and that was enough. The shelf didn't notice, and neither did the page. The magnet that lost its grip. There was once a round magnet on the side of an old fridge that no longer held anything up. Not because it was weak, just because there was nothing to hold. It had once pinned coupons and to-do lists, maybe a child's drawing or grocery note written in a rush. But now it sat alone, a dot of color with no job. No one took it down. It wasn't in the way. It simply stayed, still magnetic, just not needed. The cup that didn't have to be washed. A glass sat in the sink, but there was nothing in it. No smudge, no ring, no leftover scent. It had been used maybe, or maybe just sat there out of habit. It wasn't dirty, but it wasn't clean either. Just in between, gently catching bits of the overhead light in its shallow curve. No one reached for it all day. No water ran, no towel followed. It was just a cup, not part of anything now. The cushion with a sinking corner. On a small love seat near a window, one of the cushions had a corner that always dipped lower than the others. No one remembered why. It wasn't ripped or folded, it just knew how to lean. When someone sat, it barely moved. When no one sat, it still looked lived in. The sun hit it most in the early afternoon, and by evening it was just part of the room again. It was never adjusted, never fluffed, and somehow that was fine. The fog that didn't bother the birds. One morning, a soft fog blanketed the tops of trees, but the birds didn't seem to notice. They moved slowly, quietly, but not because of the mist, just because it was morning. The air tasted like wet stone, not enough to hold on to, just enough to notice. The fog didn't thicken or drift. It stayed exactly as it was for about an hour, then lifted without ceremony. The branches never moved. The birds never stopped. The day simply arrived behind the softness. The log that didn't finish sinking. Near the edge of a slow creek, a fallen log rested half submerged in water. The bark had softened, and the one end had dipped slightly below the surface, but it never fully sank. Insects passed over it. Moss crept around the sides, but nothing tried to claim it. Sometimes ripples formed where the water met the wood, but they weren't caused by anything. They just happened. The log didn't resist the water, but it never disappeared into it either. The grass that grew sideways. There was a patch of tall grass that grew at an angle, not because of wind and not toward the sun. It simply leaned as if the ground itself had made a quiet decision. The blades curved together like they had been brushed one direction long ago, and never bothered to stand back up. Birds sometimes landed nearby, but never disturbed it. A breeze passed, and nothing changed. It grew the way it always had, just slightly wrong, and perfectly fine with that. The nest that outlived the tree. High up on a bare branch, a nest still held its shape even though the tree itself had stopped growing. The bark peeled slowly, the limbs grew thinner, but the nest stayed woven and quiet. It hadn't been used in seasons, maybe longer. No feathers, no sound, just a hollow shape that once meant something, and now didn't need to. When the wind moved the branch, the nest stayed balanced. It wasn't waiting for birds, it just stayed. And that's all I have for tonight. The stories have come to an end, so I'll be on my way. Sleep well, and maybe we'll meet again tomorrow.